We have some time for questions, and I think, we are a little bit, it was heavy, wasn't it? But it is, yes, but I think it is time, and you should use the chance you have right now here to raise the questions. We start with Mr. Rode. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Professor Hilgert, for this interesting talk. I have a question for clarification because, well, as you presented institutional challenges and in the 12 Cs, you also stressed the necessity to establish core facilities. You have presented a lot of actions, programs, and measures, for instance, Germany took at the moment, yeah? And I think a lot of resources are provided for these initiatives. However, I was wondering if you coordinate your efforts, for instance, with UNESCO, with advisory bodies. Is there also a sort of coordination with other partners from Europe? Yeah, because the European countries have proven to be very ineffective in other fields when it comes to react to crisis and conflicts. Yeah, and I could imagine that elsewhere in Europe, for instance in France or Britain, due to current agendas, yeah, many people would operate in the same field instead of coordinating their efforts. It doesn't mean to impose a European framework on, for instance, countries like Syria or Iraq, but rather to sort of streamline their efforts. Thank you very much.
I think there are two answers to your question. The first answer is yes, the projects, measures that we're carrying out at the Engineering Museum are sort of coordinated and developed in accordance with UNESCO, ICOM, and other bodies. This is why we're talking to these institutions on a regular basis. But at the same time, it is very clear that what you've pointed out is probably one of the biggest challenges, which is why I said we need a global strategy. I think we're lacking exactly that. I think we're lacking a concerted effort. We're lacking, especially on a European level, but not only on a European level, the attempt to allocate the existing resources and capacities effectively to prevent the doubling of measures, to inform us what measures are already taken by other institutions or bodies. In these days, most of us are traveling a lot to international conferences on heritage in danger. I just returned from Stockholm 10 days before I was in Athens, 10 days before I was in New York, and so on. It's just going to go on like this for until the end of the year. And what we're discovering is that everybody, every institution, every country is trying to do something. They're concerned, they're investing a lot of money. You know that the British government is investing £3 million to help Iraq in a capacity building project that is set up by the British Museum. You know that President Hollande about 10 days ago has announced a program for the protection of the heritage of Iraq and Syria. But we're far away from the kind of coordinated effort that would be needed, and we're far away from an effort that is established in accordance and in constant exchange with the affected countries. This is something that bothers me very, very much, I have to say. This is why I keep talking about the global north, about trying to avoid neocolonialisms or asymmetries. Sometimes I get the feeling that the measures that are being proposed are designed to make the respective countries and people sleep a bit better, but not so much to really change something in the countries themselves. When you start talking about 3D digitization in countries like Iraq, you also have to answer the questions where the data is supposed to be stored. because there are very, very few servers, there are very few people who have the capacity to deal with this kind of data and evaluate it. So if you do that and the data ends up being stored in Germany, in Paris, in Italy, then you haven't really achieved all that much except increase your data storage and shown that you know how to use these instruments. But this is, I think, not the way it works. So we need more strategic answers. We need a plan, and that plan should very closely listen to the needs and requirements of the states, of the local communities, and not try to impose something that is sometimes, well, not really adequate for the situation. Yes, there is a lack of coordination, absolutely.
Thank you very much. My name is Yara Mualla. I'm from Syria and I'm doing my PhD in TU Berlin. My question is how much there is an experience gained from the Iraq case in order to prevent things in Syria, because the Iraq is a bit older than that. And I would like also to get your insight on how late the reaction was on what's happening in Syria due to the political and institutional problems and challenges. Because I remember, at the very beginnings, due to the sanctions and to the situation, it was really difficult even to talk to the Directorate General of Antiquities and Museums, and they have been, in a way, left alone at the very beginning. So if I can get your insight on how to prevent that and what are the lessons learned. And yeah, thank you.
Also very, very complex questions, and I'm trying to be a little bit quicker. I think, first of all, I want to say that we're in close contact with the DGM and with Mamoun Abdul Karim. And one of the lessons that he has learned and that the Syrian General Directorate has learned from Iraq is that it is necessary to evacuate provincial museums, that it is necessary to do preventive documentation and preventive evacuation of museums and, if possible, of archaeological sites. This is something that was not done as extensively in Iraq in 2003. And when you read publications by Donny George, the then director of the Iraq Museum in 2003, he said, we made one big mistake, or we had made one big mistake in the past. We had not inventoried completely our objects. And as you know, both for the retrieval of objects that are ending up in the illicit antiquities trade, but also for the reconstruction, it is very important to have inventories. This is why I'm saying preventive documentation is so important, and I think Syria and the Syrian authorities have learned from this lesson and have done what they could to avoid damages, to avoid the plundering of museums, and to bring objects to safe places. I think, as we all know, the murder, the tragic death of Khalid al-Assad was basically linked to this strategy of the DGM because he knew actually where the objects were. And I still think that a lot of what is going on at the site of ancient Palmyra is a punishment for this attempt to save the movable objects. I think, and that's the second part of your question, I do think that the international community has reacted too late to what is going on in Iraq and Syria. We usually forget when we talk about the looting of archaeological sites that in Iraq, for example, this has been going on since 1990. I mean, it's been going on since the 19th century, but aggravated lootings of archaeological sites we've witnessed since 1990, and the images I showed you were from 2008. These are not images that are linked to Daesh, IS, or political extremist groups. These are lootings done for the antiquities market, primarily in Europe and North America. So let us not forget that this has been going on for a very long time, and that the international community has been closing mostly their eyes against this massive threat. For us, for people dealing with this topic, the significant change also in political strategies and in the public attention was the announcement that Daesh is making money or is financing itself selling antiquities. That was in mid-June 2014. The Guardian published an article claiming numbers that turned out to be false. But ever since, we've had this amazing interest in the protection of cultural heritage, an amazing interest in measures preventing the illicit trade of antiquities, and that's been a turning point. It's a shame that it took this to wake up the international community, but I think now there is more awareness also on a political level. Last point, thinking about the German initiative to change the cultural heritage protection law and the corresponding French initiative and the initiatives taken on a European level, I think we're much further ahead as we were 1.5 years ago, but I wish we would have started this discourse 25 years ago, at the latest.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Hyun-Kyung Lee, and then I recently completed my PhD in Heritage Studies at University of Cambridge, and I'm working as a junior research fellow at Seoul National University in South Korea. And your presentation inspired me a lot, and then I have two questions regarding your presentation. First of all, you emphasize the communication and cooperation between non-governmental and governmental, international, national, and non-academic groups in order to protect and then improve the sustainable heritage. And then, but you, in the first question, and you answered, it still have some lack of communication and lack of coordination. And then I'd like to ask whether you have a certain suggestion, what is the improve the kinds of the coordination and communication between the different groups. And my second question is that it was very impressed to see that you introduced the Iraq and German a coordination about the illicit traffic things. And then I'm just want to ask what is your position to see in terms of repatriation? So because it's a really good thing to work together to see the antiquities between two different countries, but in an internationalist, and then they seems to put the antiquities in the safer countries, and then nationalists tended to emphasize the repatriation to the original countries. And then I'm a South Korean, so yeah, so I want to know about your position about that.
Two very complex topics that I would have to talk about for 2 hours. Maybe an answer to the first question first. You're right in pointing out that there seems to be a discrepancy. What is going on in my head when I'm saying this is that I think you always have to start with a concrete case. You always have to go on a case-by-case basis, which means that we're always talking about concrete projects at a certain place involving certain people and certain stakeholders. And I think this is the way it has to be when you talk about a local situation. You have to try to get everybody on board. You have to try to talk about all the stakeholders, because you know that without the local communities and without the local stakeholders and without their voluntary engagement and activity, you will not be able in the long run to sustain museums, heritage sites, and so on. So I think the strategy or the way of doing things on a local level has to be that it should be mandatory to involve all the concerned stakeholders. And the concerned stakeholders in my mind are also the kindergarten teachers and the school teachers, and not just the mayor or the police chief. They're also important, but you also have to make the connection to the educational sector. You also have to make the connection to the media sector. So you always have to start from what is at a local level. At the same time, and this is where I think organizations like UNESCO and the governments come in, at the same time you have to reinforce this process. So you need a top-down beginning, you need a top-down stimulus, but you need a bottom-up process that is filling the process with life. And I think this is how it comes together. Sustainable heritage protection, as I understand it when I talk about sustainability, cannot be a top-down process because top-down is not sustainable. Sustainability you will achieve only if you involve as many parties and as many capacities and resources as possible. That also includes a possibility for failure, because in some cases you may not be able to mobilize the support on a local level that would be needed for a sustainable heritage protection or development, and then you have a problem. And this is, I think, where one of the conflicts starts, where the government says, I want this for touristic reasons, economical reasons, or whatever, prestige reasons, and the local community says, but we cannot do this for various reasons, and I think this is one of the conflicts. Repatriation is a very complex topic, as you know, because we, again, have to argue and decide on a case-by-case basis. This is why it's so important, I think, to inquire into the provenance of collections, for example, because it will, first of all, show you how well you can document how the object entered your collection. If this is done in accordance with the laws that were in place at the time when the transfer of objects took place, it's very hard to claim or to justify a repatriation claim on legal grounds. But as we all know, there are repatriation claims that are justified with national, cultural, ethical considerations. This is where it gets rough because you don't have any legal instruments to solve these repatriation claims. This is where arbitration and mediation comes in and plays an important role. And I think this is why it's so important that countries start talking to each other. It also means that the countries who have been appropriating objects in the past, no matter what the circumstances were, have to start being accountable, which means they have to completely know how the objects entered their country. This is true for archaeological collections. When you talk about imperial domination, colonization, booties of war, it very much depends on the actual case, as you know. But again, I think it's one of these very fundamental issues in the relationship between countries. And we've been witnessing, especially in my field of expertise in Syria and Iraq, that these countries, for the first time probably, are taking this topic very, very seriously, which is a good thing, but it also means that we have to change our attitude toward our collections and toward our history, and we have to be ready to enter into this dialogue.
Yeah, I don't have questions, maybe some comments. Whether we, the community, reacted too late in the case of Syria and also Iraq. Well, I think our cultural heritage community learned its lessons, but we are not the driver of global or international politics. Yeah? Nevertheless, we have some impact. In the new 2006 mandate of the UNIFIL troops in South Lebanon, the Hague Convention is mentioned in the doctrine for the first time. And in the mandate for the French troops in Mali, the Hague Convention is also mentioned. Yeah? So there is an impact. We can trigger influence on the international community, but we are not the drivers. How early or how late the international community, the Security Council and the countries react is a matter of realpolitik. Yeah? And they also learned the lessons, how intervention worked in Afghanistan, in Iraq, all the, the expectations and the failures. And I think this explains a lot why the international community hesitates to really intervene in Syria. And there are many other issues on the table despite cultural heritage protection. And you can start to intervene, just the Russian-Turkey case. The case Russia-Turkey and the turmoil is occurring now. I mean, neither Putin nor Erdogan would have dreamed 4 weeks ago that they would have a serious conflict concerning Syria in this case. Yeah? So there are reasons why governments hesitate to intervene. Yeah? Global solutions, I mean, we are talking about conflict-solving strategies. Of course, we should try for global solutions. I think it is quite realistic that in the end there will be no set of global solutions to heritage protection, despite the fact that we should of course work on international conventions like the World Heritage Convention, Hague Convention, but the conflicts over time are so diverse, the heritage is so diverse, people are so diverse, that we will have to work year by year on new conflict solutions and new global new solutions to each single set of challenges and threats. This also relates to the issue of coordination. Yeah? There is, of course, a lack of coordination, but I think there's also the impossibility of a 100% coordination. Yeah? I think because many actors or many groups, organizations, institutions that want to act have hardly any access or no access to international, intergovernmental bodies that could provide coordination or global coordination. I think that's, we must be also realistic with our anticipation that at some point we will have a global solution for everything and a 100% coordination. I think this will never happen. Yeah, and there's a last thing. I'm sorry. I'm very. I don't want to be too pessimistic. Yeah, yeah. But one positive last aspect. One positive last aspect. I like very much the idea and how you start to put it into real that museums take a crucial part in the venture. Because I see that it's very difficult for organizations or for projects that are launched to have a long-lasting impact. And I see that universities have, we talked about it yesterday evening, current universities in Europe really have difficulties with planning ahead for a longer period and triggering impact. But I think the major museums in Europe, especially on the basis of their history 100 years back, yeah, might have a crucial role in future cultural heritage preservation. Museums like yours, the British Museum, the Louvre, the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna and others. And in relation to that, I think also army museums, armed forces museums, might have a crucial role in future in cultural property protection training for the armed forces. I think the role of museums is totally underestimated. There is so much potential in the museums, and I hope that the Vorderasiatische Museum will be a best practice case. Very, very positive in the end.
Up to you now.
Three things very, very quickly. As I said, there is a reason why a lot of museums are not really daring to go down that path for many reasons. It has also to do with capacity, with self-image and so on. But I do agree that especially museums that are publicly funded, that are embedded in a foundation context, for example, and have a longevity that is corresponding, could make a difference, and they should make a difference also because they have the knowledge that is required, the expert knowledge when it comes to how you deal with the objects, how you preserve them, and so on. So obviously we're called upon to have that role. I'm not saying that states should intervene. I think this is a misunderstanding. I never said that, especially in the case of Syria, where it's clear that Syria has never asked any state to intervene. This is one of the biggest problems with the safe haven propositions that we're getting from all over the place. American museum directors, François Hollande, Jean-Luc Martinez, that are saying, well, we should train archaeologists to go into Syria, take out objects. This is an impossibility, if you ask me. So yes, you cannot go into a country unilaterally, but you need some sort of consensus. And this is bringing me back to your first point, or the second point. I'm not quite as pessimistic. I don't think there will be a global solution, and I never talked about a global solution. I'm talking about a global strategy. I very much want to have more coordination. I'm not talking about 100% coordination, but even 15% coordination would be a great step ahead. And I'm thinking that a global strategy is still very much needed, because we need to have the resources, we need to have the capacities, we need to have the expert knowledge. If you want to have somebody who knows how to read cuneiform, or who knows what Syrian architecture in the 1st centuries AD looks like, you will have to train him now. He has to start studying now. If you want him to be in a capacity to help 10 years from now. If he has to study now, it means you have to train somebody who can teach him, so you should have started 10 years or 15 years ago. And I think this is very much important also for countries like Iraq and Syria, but many other countries. You don't have the academic infrastructure in place in the country that is needed to have a sustainable knowledge transfer. So I totally agree we won't have a global solution because of what you said, because of the individual cases and problems. But I still think you need to work toward a global strategy, because without a strategy you will not be ready when you're called upon to have solutions even in specific contexts.
Only one.
Yeah. And one very self-critical aspect about the lack of coordination is who is playing the leading role. We have so many actors and players at universities, organizations and so on, who have the capacities, their competence, their experience, but there is no rule who would have the leading role in UNESCO, of course, but there are so many other people around the globe who want to have a leading role in whatever crisis, because you can make also a profit out of it. Also academics can profit from this. Yeah? Yeah? And this is also a very serious part of the problem.
Thank you very much. Answer? No answer. Okay, so thank you very much, mainly to Professor Hilgert. Thank you for coming.